"You know we don't do roadside service, right?" That's what her manager joked as Lena tied her apron and ran outside. An old man was pushing a rusted Chevelle through the diner lot hood, up smoke trailing. She didn't ask why, just knelt beside the engine and said, "Let me try." He thanked her with a nod and disappeared down the road. The next morning, 4 army jeeps rolled in and shut down the lot, and the sergeant major asked, "Where's the girl who helped the colonel?" If you believe kindness doesn't need rank comment, respect below. The evening shift at Earl's diner moved with predictable rhythm. The clink of silverware, the hiss of the grill, the bell that pinged when orders were ready. After 3 years of serving pancakes in this roadside establishment, Lena Dawson navigated the narrow aisles with practiced ease. Outside rain threatened, leaving the air heavy and electric. The kind of evening that made old injuries ache and engines struggle. Lena, 24, wiped down the counter for the 3rd time that hour. Tuesday nights were always slow. Just a few regulars nursing coffees and truckers, finishing meals before hitting the interstate. "You're wiping that counter into another dimension," Earl said, his weathered face creasing with amusement. At 62, he'd owned the diner longer than Lena had been alive. She smiled, just keeping busy. The truth was she'd rather be elbow deep in an engine than refilling sugar dispensers. Her father, gone 3 years now, had been the best mechanic in 3 counties. "Cars speak their own language," she'd told her when she was barely tall enough to see over a fender. "You just gotta learn to listen." It was his voice she still heard whenever she popped a hood. Through the front windows, headlights swept across the parking lot. A classic Chevelle red paint, dulled by years and weather. The engine made a sound Lena recognized immediately, the desperate cough of a car about to die. Blue smoke poured from under the hood. The driver, an elderly man with a gray beard and military straight posture, climbed out. Without frustration, he simply began pushing the heavy car toward the edge of the lot. Alone in gathering darkness, no phone in hand, no call for help. Lena untied her apron. "You know we don't do roadside service, right?" Earl called after her, but his tone was light. She was already out the door, the bell jingling behind her. The man looked up as she approached, steely eyes beneath a weathered brow. His olive jacket had seen better days, boots worn but impeccably clean. "Need a hand?" she asked. He just nodded, a short, precise movement. Lena knelt beside the engine, her hands moving with practiced confidence. The distributor cap was loose. 2 hoses worked free, simple fixes that would get him rolling. "Try it now," she said, stepping back. The key turned. The engine sputtered, then roared back to life with surprising vigor for its age. The old Chevelle seemed to stand tall or proud to be functioning again. The man's face remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened. He offered a small formal salute, the gesture of someone for whom respect was not casual but essential. No words, no elaborate thanks, just a nod between 2 people who understood that some problems could be solved with quiet confidence. Then he was gone, the shut growling down the highway toward the darkening horizon. Lena returned inside, brushing grease from her hands. No customers had noticed her absence. The only evidence, a handprint of oil on her sleeve and a dark patch where the old man had bowed slightly in thanks. Dawn broke over Earl's diner with the same reliability as the coffee percolating behind the counter. Lena arrived at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes early as always, and began her opening routine. Lights on, grill warming, fresh flowers in the small vase at the register. By 6:30, the usual early crowd had trickled in. 2 retired teachers with their crossword puzzles. A handful of construction workers fueling up before their shift. Sheriff Boyd on his way home after night duty. The rhythm of another ordinary day, until it wasn't. The first rumble came from the east, a deep mechanical growl that didn't belong to the usual 18-wheelers. Lena glanced up from pouring coffee to see 4 army jeeps approaching in perfect formation, followed by a blackest Suburban with government plates. They pulled into the parking lot with military precision, each vehicle angling to block different exits. Within seconds, the diner's modest lot was effectively sealed off. Conversations faltered, then stopped. Forks paused midway to mouths. Coffee cups hovered above saucers. "What in God's name?" Earl muttered, moving toward the window. Soldiers in formal uniform emerged. 8, then 12 of them. They stationed themselves at strategic points, not drawing weapons but clearly establishing a perimeter. The breakfast crowd whispered urgently, "Is this a raid? Did something happen? Are we being evacuated?" Sheriff Boyd stood hand instinctively, moving toward his holster. "I wasn't notified of any." The door opened, bell jingling with incongruous cheerfulness. A towering figure filled the doorframe, a sergeant major whose presence seemed to compress the air in the room. His uniform bore countless ribbons and insignia, yet his expression remained unreadable as he scanned the diner's interior. Removing his hat with methodical precision, he spoke in a voice accustomed to being heard across battlefields. "We're looking for a Miss Lena Dawson." The room turned toward her as one. Lena stood frozen beside table 4 coffee pots, still in hand. "Sir," her voice sounded small even to her own ears. The sergeant major's eyes found hers assessing but not unkind. "Miss Dawson." He crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching into his breast pocket to retrieve a photograph. "Is this you?" Lena stared at the image herself, crouched beside the Chevelle the previous night, a smudge of grease on her cheek. Concentration etched across her features. The angle suggested it had been taken from the car itself, or perhaps from some security camera she hadn't noticed. "Yes," she managed, "but I don't understand." The sergeant major addressed the room at large. "My apologies for the disruption." Then to Lena specifically, "Colonel Everett Sloan asked us to find you." Complete silence engulfed the diner. "Colonel Everett Sloan," Sheriff Boyd asked, recognition dawning in his voice. The sergeant major nodded. "3rd Armored Division, 2 tours in the Gulf, presidential advisor on military readiness." He turned back to Lena. "The colonel asked me to convey his personal thanks." Lena blinked. "For fixing his car." His words were, "Find the young woman who reminded me why I served." The sergeant major's voice softened slightly. "He doesn't say things like that lightly." Max stepped forward. "I'm confused. All this." He gestured toward the parking lot full of military vehicles. "For a thank you, clone. The colonel is presenting to the Joint Chiefs this morning. He couldn't come himself." The sergeant major's expression remained serious, but when he arrived at base last night, after his car broke down, he insisted we locate you. Lena's face flushed. "I just fixed a hose. Anyone would have helped." "Ma'am, with respect, they wouldn't." The sergeant major's eyes held decades of observation. "Most people walked right past him." The colonel said you didn't ask who he was, just what he needed. The diner remained eerily quiet, everyone watching this unexpected scene unfold. "The colonel also asked me to give you this." The sergeant major extended a small velvet box. Inside lay a challenge coin bearing the insignia of the 5th Tactical Regiment. Next to it, a folded business card with an embossed pentagon seal. "If you ever need anything," the sergeant major said simply. Then with the same precision that had marked their arrival, he saluted her, a full formal acknowledgement typically reserved for fellow officers. In the stillness that followed, a customer near the back whispered loud enough to be heard, "Who'd have thought Arlena helped Colonel Everett Sloan?" The name rippled through the diner, recognition dawning on the faces of the veterans among them. Outside in the blocked parking lot, soldiers returned to their vehicles with the same quiet efficiency with which they had arrived. Lena stood motionless, the challenge coin heavy in her palm. The ordinary day had vanished like morning mist. If you believe real recognition finds you when you least expect it, comment respect below. By noon, the story had leaped beyond the diner's walls. Local news vans parked where military vehicles had stood hours earlier. Lena's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family and strangers who had somehow obtained her number. "Waitress who fixed Colonel Chevelle gets military surprise." The headlines splashed across websites in the local paper's special afternoon edition. Beneath it, a hastily captured photo of Lena holding the challenge coin, looking more bewildered than heroic. Mac had to hire 2 extra servers to handle the sudden influx of customers. Everyone in town suddenly craving diner food and first-hand accounts of the morning's events. "Just tell me again," an elderly woman asked, clutching Lena's arm as she delivered a club sandwich. "Was he in uniform?" "No, ma'am. Just an olive jacket. I had no idea who he was." That part of the story seemed to resonate most deeply, the fact that Lena had helped without knowing. It became the detail repeated in whispers and social media posts. She didn't know he was a colonel. By evening, a retired master sergeant from the nearby army base arrived with a printed history of Colonel Everett Sloan's service record. He read it aloud to the packed diner. Distinguished Service Cross and Desert Storm, Presidential Unit Citation, led the 3rd Armored through the heaviest fighting. The list continued each accomplishment, making Lena's simple act of kindness seem simultaneously smaller and more significant. All that the Master Sergeant concluded, "And he noticed you." The next morning brought more surprises. A GoFundMe page appeared. "Help restore Colonel Everett Sloan's Chevelle." Within hours it had raised $15,000, mostly small donations from veterans across the country. The organizer, a retired Army mechanic, contacted Lena directly. "The colonel won't accept charity, but he might accept a community restoration project if you're involved." Lena found herself at the center of something larger than herself. larger than a simple car repair on a Tuesday night. Veterans began visiting the diner regularly, not to gawk but to connect. They left patches, coins, and handwritten notes. Some simply nodded to her in quiet understanding. Others shared stories of moments when civilians had shown them unexpected kindness. 6 weeks later, the Chevelle returned, transported on a flatbed truck to the diner's parking lot. The restoration team had worked miracles. The rusted red had transformed into midnight blue with a subtle military star on the hood. The engine purred with renewed vigor, and there, just above the driver's side wheel well, Lena's signature clear-coated into the paint itself. The colonel insisted. The restoration leader told her, said your name belonged on something built to last. The following day, a formal letter arrived from Washington, D.C. The Central Command HQ seal embossed on heavy cream paper. To the young woman who didn't ask who I was, just what I needed. In my 40 years of service, I've learned that character reveals itself in unguarded moments. You showed me that the values we fight to protect, decency, initiative, selflessness, still thrive in quiet corners of our country. The Chevelle was my father's. He taught me to drive in it before I left for West Point. I've kept it running as a reminder of where I came from. Now it will remind me of something equally important, where we're going as long as people like you still exist. With profound respect, Colonel Everett Sloan enclosed a folded flag with certification that it had been flown over the Central Command HQ in her name. Lena framed the letter but kept the flag in his triangular case beside her father's toolbox. 3 months after the Chevelle incident, she approached Earl with an idea. I want to offer basic car maintenance classes at the community center, especially for young women and teenagers. Earl smiled. Got a name for this program? Lena nodded. Fixed Forward. The first class drew 7 participants. By the 6th, there were waiting lists. Veterans volunteered as assistant instructors. Local auto parts stores donated supplies. The diner became the unofficial headquarters. Above the register, Earl hung a framed photograph of Lena beside the restored Chevelle, surrounded by the restoration team, mostly veterans in various stages of military life. Beside it, an American flag signed by 5 generals who had visited specifically to meet the Chevelle mechanic, as Lena had been nicknamed in military circles. The simple caption beneath read, "Service wears many faces." Lena never saw Colonel Everett Sloan again. His duties kept him in Washington, then overseas, his name occasionally appearing in news articles about military strategy or veteran affairs. Once she spotted him in the background of a presidential address, standing tall among other officers, but his absence didn't diminish the ripple effects of their brief encounter. Every few months, a soldier would pass through Earl's diner, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. They would leave small tokens, a unit patch, a challenge coin, sometimes just a handwritten note. The colonel sends his regards, some would say. Others simply nodded as if part of an unspoken understanding. Lena kept each item in a wooden box beneath the counter, not displayed but preserved. Reminders that small actions could echo far beyond their origin points. The Fix Forward program expanded to 3 locations, then 5. Lena hired 2 instructors, both women veterans, to help manage the growing class schedule. What had begun as basic maintenance lessons evolved into comprehensive programs, car purchasing advice, negotiation tactics for auto repairs, even scholarship opportunities for women entering automotive trade schools. "We fix more than cars" became their unofficial motto. 4 years after the Chevelle night, a woman in army dress blues entered the diner during the quiet lull between lunch and dinner. Her uniform bore the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. "Lena Dawson?" she asked, approaching the counter. Lena nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Morris, Colonel Everett Sloan's executive officer." She placed a small wooden box on the counter. "He asked me to give you this when the Chevelle turned 60 years old, which is today." The box was hand-carved, inlaid with what looked like pieces of blue automotive paint, the same shade as the restored Chevelle. Inside, a dog tag bearing just 2 words, "Still rolling." "He wanted you to know that both he and the key are still in service," the lieutenant colonel said with a smile, "though he's finally retiring next month." Lena ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "Please thank him for me. He's aware of what you've built here." The officer replied, gesturing toward a wall covered with Fixed Forward graduation photos. "Says it's a better legacy than most generals leave behind." Later that evening, after closing, Lena placed the dog tag in a small display stand beside the register. Beneath it, she added a handwritten sign, "We don't serve heroes, we serve with them." The next morning, Earl noticed it and raised an eyebrow. "Bit sentimental for you, isn't it?" Lena shrugged, filling salt shakers with practiced efficiency. "Maybe I'm finally learning that some things deserve to be said out loud." On Veterans Day that year, the diner closed early for the first time in its history. The entire staff attended the dedication of the new technical training center at the community college, the Lena Dawson Automotive Academy. The colonel, newly retired, cut the ribbon himself. He and Lena spoke only briefly, but their handshake said everything necessary. Some connections don't need words, they just need maintenance. Subscribe to Steelheart Stories if you believe true rank is earned in silence and remembered in oil. Even years later, Lena's story traveled across veteran forums and quiet coffee tables. Somewhere out there, an old Chevelle still roared across highways, carrying not just a colonel, but the legacy of a woman who reminded everyone that true respect isn't spoken, it's shown in action. And at Earl's diner, the grease beneath Lena's nails told a story louder than any salute.